Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fuel Poverty Action's series of monthly learning sessions. My name's Amal. Fuel poverty is a group of ordinary people fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off energy and rip-off prepayment meters. We campaign to protect people from fuel poverty. We challenge rip-off energy companies and unfair policies that leave people to endure cold homes. We also take action for warm, well-insulated homes and clean and affordable energy that's under the control of people and communities, not private companies. And Fuel for Thought, which is where we are tonight, is our space to share research and lived experience, tackle lies, and clear up confusion on fuel poverty and climate change as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists, and campaigners. This is our 16th Fuel for Thought session, and we record every session, which we then post on our YouTube channel. So if you've missed any, I invite you to check out Fuel Poverty Action's YouTube channel, and you can catch up on all of the sessions there. I'm gonna go straight in and pass on to our first speaker, Steve Harper, who's an engineer and manager who's worked in the construction industry for 40 years. And Steve is also a member of Fuel Poverty Action. He's an expert in electrical services, heating, ventilation, and cooling, and has a particular interest in heat networks. Tonight, Steve is going to be talking to us about practical actions we can take to fight fuel poverty at home, free and also with small improvements on a budget. Thank you for being with us this evening, Steve. I'm gonna.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm gonna share your slides. Can everyone see that? Brilliant. Yep. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Amal. Good evening, everybody. I was just going to run through, it's really like a summary of some of the things that come to mind when I consider this issue of what can we do to simply improve our lot in our houses in terms of managing energy consumption and limiting damp and having enough ventilation that we're getting rid of possibly damaging pollutants, etc. So next slide, please, Amal. So one of the points I'd make initially is that it's difficult to assess the need in any particular situation because we have properties that fall into very much sort of 3 or 4 categories. We've got stuff pre-1970, which is really quite often single wall construction, really subject to damp and other issues of ventilation and damp and condensation of windows and so on. If it's not been refurbished, of course, that is. But a lot of the council housing is sitting in a pretty sorry state, and it does have those problems that are really just there because of the age of the build of the property and the quality of the build. Of course, back in those days, we could afford to throw as much coal, gas, or whatever it was at heating a property, and keeping the property above 18 degrees or so at all times in the winter does actually alleviate all of these problems. So these properties were designed whenever the price of energy was such that we could just throw it away basically and use as much as we liked, wanton kind of use of it. The oil crisis in the early 70s put paid to that. So in the early 1980s building regulations, everybody started to look a bit more at insulation, and the building regulations started to specify that new built dwellings we had to have certain levels of insulation. Air leakage, which I'll come on and talk to you about more later, is very much another factor in all of this, and it's only really come into play in the last 10 years. We've been notionally looking at it for 10 to 15 in building regs and SAP calculations. SAP is a performance calculation for energy in buildings. So down to what I put in the slides then. So what causes problems in dwellings? Well, cool surfaces allow moisture to condense. Depending on the properties of the air in the room, how humid it is or otherwise, and what temperature it's at, it holds less or more air. Warm air tends to hold more moisture, so if you're cooking and so on in your rooms at a really good 22, 23-degree temperature, the air itself soaks up all of that moisture. And if at that point you open windows and ventilate a bit, you get rid of the moisture load that will not then cool down when the rooms cool down later on in the evening and then form condensation on the cold walls. So lack of use of heating is really well related to both comfort clearly and to the keeping the surface temperature of the walls higher. That is what alleviates or prevents damp from forming because the wall is not at a temperature which the air at different properties will actually give up its moisture to the wall and form condensation. So per wall insulation, as I was saying, from 1970s and stuff, that does cause large issues with the condensation itself. And the walls also cool down fast as the temperature drops outside because of the poor insulation. There's more of a lag in highly insulated modern buildings. It takes a long time before you get anything like the external temperature inside a very modern property. By modern, I'm saying the last 5 years or 10 years. So thermal bridging is another problem. This is really down to corners and details on the construction around windows and in the corners of rooms. Because of the nature of butting two pieces of insulation together, to put it simply, that butt joint is actually a compromised U-value line in the wall then, so that area will cool down a lot more. And this is one of the primary drivers as to why you see a lot of condensation occurring in corners. The other reason is people tend to push furniture into corners, which prevents air from moving naturally around through that corner location. And again, that doesn't help to lets the wall temperature drop, and again, that causes condensation. So the dampness, as is well recorded now and well known, does actually cause mold, and the mold causes a lot of health problems. Next slide, please, Matt. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm waiting for my version of the slides to go. Could you go back? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So as we just touched on, the daily purge ventilation. Well, purge ventilation is really when you've created a large moisture load in the room by cooking or by air from occupants or particularly from showering and bathing. That moisture load, just after you've created all of that moisture, the best thing you can do really is to open the window for 5 minutes in that particular room, probably with the door closed to that room. Try and ventilate and remove the moisture from the room in the first place, which means that whenever your property cools down later overnight, if you're even heating it more than 16 degrees, a lot of people don't because they can't afford it. But if you're heating your property a bit during the day, overnight it will invariably cool down further. And the problem with that is that if there's moisture, we're talking about the moisture load from the cooking and bathing and even humans breathing out, we breathe out moisture. All of that is building up in the property. Walls cool down overnight as the temperature drops, and then boom, all of that condensation is going to form on your walls. So you really want to have this sort of purge ventilation idea. So, as I said in the note here, the Germans are keen on this, doing this, and they do it twice a day for 5 or 10 minutes. They call this lifting, which means to air. And in the UK, it's called house burping, apparently. I don't know who came up with that, but house burping. So, basically, the idea is to remove those problem moisture load and problem smells and so on, just to get fresh air into the property. Now, the air will not take very long to heat back up again. If you don't do longer than 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes, it will heat up quite rapidly, even if you're just putting a little heat into your property again. That's not going to cause too much of a lag. Over a year, yes, it's going to have a slight effect on your energy, but it's all these things are compromised. There's a balance between, the it's a seesaw between having the room heated properly, which will prevent all the moisture condensation problems and allow you to, an unventilated room that causes problems with pollutants and things. And on the other side, you've got the moisture and the condensation on walls. In some rooms and properties and older properties, this is just an irresolvable problem in terms of the basic nature of the building itself, the house itself. So, next slide, please. So, very quickly then, through a series of things. Most of these are well known to people, so I won't elaborate too much. But in my house, we've actually done all of these things in this list on the left. We use door draft stoppers. We use draft-proofing tape and internal doors. So the foam tape on windows externally. I use tape to tape up the windows that I'm not going to open over the winter because our windows are cast iron and the wind just rushes through there and we lose loads of heat. So it is worth looking around your property at all of these things in this diagram and see if any of those you've got can be closed off. At the bottom, we fitted these escutcheons to keyholes because all of the keyholes, obviously the wind again, with the wind pressure just rushes through those keyholes. And it's surprising, you had a few of those up and you've suddenly got a 6-inch hole in the wall, you know? And that's why sort of in our heads, we don't really consider that strip underneath the door, if you compress that all together in one square, it's probably a 3-inch square. And if we saw a 3-inch square in the wall, we would be very quick to put something over the top of it to block it, you know? Next slide, please. So as I said, damp issues are much more likely when the room temperature is below 18 degrees centigrade. We can't get away from that. The ideal humidity levels for rooms, yes, 40 to 50. Bedroom, 30 to 50. Well, my study here, because of the air leaking in from outside, which dehumidifies, can get as low as 30 degrees when it gets, sorry, 30% relative humidity. When the humidity goes as low as 30, you get static shocks off everything. Your jumper builds up static shocks, and your eyes dry out very much. And because I'm using the computer and I'm not blinking enough, my eyes tend to dry out. And at that 30 degrees, sorry, 30% of humidity, as opposed to something like 45 or 50, it's not an issue at 45 to 50 humidity, but at 30% humidity, it is. So a lot of people with rooms that aren't very well heated, the humidity, sorry, the rooms heated to 18 degrees C, the humidity should kind of look after itself. In some stately homes and kind of historic buildings, we used to control the heating by turning it on at 16 degrees, or if the humidity went over 15% humidity, 50% humidity, we used to actually turn the radiators on as well, and that was to stop the tapestries and all the things you normally see in sort of National Trust properties from drying out and falling apart. So next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this because I'm running a bit over time, but there are lots of controls available. And the very annoying thing about this is that some of the products you have in your house, like a boiler, some of these boilers have features that are more enhanced energy saving features like weather compensation. So basically, it turns down the flow temperature of the boiler as it gets warmer outside and vice versa. When it's colder outside, the boiler sets itself a higher flow temperature. But there's so many things that come into play here. It's very difficult to say without looking at a specific property with a specific kit in the property as to whether or not some of these things can be implemented. And if you've got a need to save energy just across the board, the advice that's normally given of turning your boiler stat right down, to like 50 or so. If you've got a condensing boiler, when the stat's like at 70 or below, and you've got a 20 degree C delta T across the system, that brings it into its condensing mode, which is where we get the much higher efficiencies out of a boiler. But all of this is not really the kind of thing people can just go and look up on the internet or look at the manufacturer's instructions. The menus to program some of this stuff for weather compensation, it's on your boiler, but it's an impenetrable long list of a kind of guidance and stuff about how to go about it. So without a bit of knowledge, it's really difficult. But a lot of plumbers wouldn't have a clue how to set that aspect on a boiler, those controls on a boiler. This is one of the problems in my industry, frankly. I do massive heat schemes, got thousands and thousands of kilowatts, but people just walk in, switch it on, and walk away. They don't care about whether it operates efficiently or not. So our houses are a bit the same. If we can't get somebody to help us with that, we're going to be operating inefficiently, slightly less efficiently than we really should be. And last slide, if that's not the last one, Mal, please. So you probably all got a lot of these things already, but getting one of these little thermometers that shows you humidity as well as temperature, just so you can track where you are, and especially if you're older, if you can keep your property heading towards 18 degrees centigrade rather than 16. But this is the position people are in. I've heard a lot of anecdotes and stories about how difficult it is for everybody to keep their properties or afford to heat their properties to 16 degrees even, and wearing a few coats and things. The other thing is if you've got little electric heaters, you can put a plug-in kilowatt hour electricity meter. These are about £10 and it tells you how much you're consuming, how much that is. You can even get it in kilowatt hours on that and then multiply it by the cost of pence of electricity if you're into that kind of level of detail. But this is part of the problem, is that the vast majority of people are not used to, reading the manual on these relatively complex bits of kit, or doing those calculations about cost and kilowatt hour. It's not something everybody's aware of, really. Very frustrating that these things are all available there, but not easy for people to implement them themselves. Thanks. That's all I want to say, I think.
Thanks so much for that, Steve. That was very comprehensive and useful. I will be, just for the benefit of everyone in the room, I will be sharing these slides in the follow-up email to the session. It's the email at which I'll also announce the next session. All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is John Handford, a retired electrical and electronic engineer from Macclesfield. John brought his bills down from £3.5 thousand a year by switching away from gas. And he's going to talk us through why and how he managed this, as well as other things he learned from his experience. John, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Samuel. Can you hear me okay? Yep, excellent. Right. Yeah, mine's a bit of a lockdown story. I was working in Manchester, driving in there every day, which is a bit of a bind, a bit stressful. Always thought that driving backwards and forwards every day was a bit of a waste of energy. But anyway, when lockdown happened, I was kept at home working on my PC and logging in through that. And I started to think, well, this is quite good. I'm not actually being as stressed as I was before. So could this actually be brought about on a more permanent basis? So I looked into early retirement because I wasn't too far off when I could retire. And okay, I'd be on a pension but lower income, but my outgoings would be less. I wouldn't be driving into work. So then I thought, well, okay, could I make further improvements on this? Could I take, for example, the 25% out of the pensions tax-free lump sum and invest it in solar panels and a heat pump? And would that work? Can you drive a heat pump from solar panels? Now, I contacted a couple of companies and they seem to sort of knock that idea on the head. They will say, no, you can't do that. But I looked into it, and the rough calculation was my £3,500 bill was made up from some electricity, but mainly the gas, which was £30,000, 30,000 kilowatt hours per year. I'm keeping my house at 23 degrees all the time, which partly explains why it's reasonably high. But I thought, well, okay, 30,000 kilowatt hours, that's 24,000 kilowatt hours of actual heat because the boiler is only 80% efficient. And if you divide 24,000 by a heat pump's efficiency, then that's usually, well, you can get, easily 400%. So you'd only need a quarter of that to actually drive the heat pump, so 6,000 kilowatt hours. And I looked to see how many solar panels I could get on the roof, and that worked out to 20 solar panels, 8 kilowatt array. That's about 7,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year. So yes, you can do it. Now, I needed a battery to go with that. So I think the first slide now, please, Amal, with the battery graph.
Yeah, just bear with me.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Yeah, my first thought was that you could just charge the battery up off the solar during the day, and then it would be, it would run like that overnight. And that's all you need to do. But of course, there is no sun or not much in winter. Now what you're seeing here is the solution to that. And basically, you can charge the battery up overnight from cheap electricity, 7 pence per kilowatt hour. Each of these lines represents a typical day in the 12 months of the year. So the black and the red are January and December, and you can see that the heating load is quite high, so although you charge the battery up, it comes down quite quick. It doesn't get sustained much by the little sun there is, and it runs out by 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And then I'm on peak rate electricity for the rest of the day. But in the summer, the sun's much brighter, so the battery charges up, and when it reaches 100%, it then exports to the grid. Now, the export rate I get paid is 15 pence per kilowatt hour. So that's twice the rate of the import. So what you can do is you can bank that 15 pence per kilowatt hour in your electricity account, build up a surplus of cash in there. And then in winter time, you can use that to buy cheap electricity at 7 pence per kilowatt hour. But of course, you can buy twice as much because of the rate difference. So in effect, I've got a seasonal battery using the electricity account as a seasonal battery, and it gives you, it's an amplified seasonal battery, giving you twice as much energy as you put in effect, in terms of cash. And the battery is so full, in fact, over the summer, you can actually what you call force discharge it. That's those rapid decline in the afternoon there, and you can discharge it as leave yourself some in there to last the rest of the day, but that all helps as well. So perhaps we go to the next slide now, please, Amal. Right, this one here is the average over each month of the year. The dark blue is the heat pump cost. The orange is the export credit. The light blue is the domestic, that's only quite small. And the red is the overall cost. So you can see in the winter, it's costing me quite a lot, but then it's actually paying me quite a lot in the summer. And the overall average over the year is that red line that runs along there, and that's £180 in credit over the year. So I'm actually in profit. Now, if I didn't do the forced discharge business with the battery, if I just left that running, so it didn't need charging much overnight, then that line goes above zero a little, but only by £127. So the bill for the year will be £127. So roughly speaking, I've brought the bills down from 3,500 to zero by this situation. And I've got rid of gas, which is great. So anyway, the next slide, please, Amal. I think that's how much does it cost, which people will be asking. Well, it cost me £20,000. That's that black line I've drawn across the spans of 30 years there, just to give you an idea of the perspective, payback time, etc. The blue line is the actual savings that it's generating. Now that's effectively what my bills used to be, £3,500 per year. So if you divide 20,000 by 3,500, you get 5.7. That's how many years it takes. That's where that blue line crosses the black line. That's how many years it takes to pay for itself. But it doesn't stop there, of course. In the next 5.7 years, it will pay for itself again. It carries on like that. The red line is a comparison to a savings account of earning 4% interest compound. So it's a much more cost-effective, much better way of investing money. In effect, it's about 17.5% interest rate on that blue line, just from the solar panels and the heat pump. The problem with this is, of course, that you've got to get the money up front. Now, I was lucky because I was at the stage where I could retire. What's available is a £7,500 bus grant. It's a boiler replacement scheme. That was only £5,000 when I did it, and it's 0% VAT on all these things as well. Now, in Italy, what they had was what they called the Super 110 scheme. It was a lockdown sort of a scheme they had going, which tried to reflate the economy after they came out of lockdown. And it paid people 110% for the cost of all these things, for solar panels, heat pumps, insulation, everything to reduce energy costs on their homes. And it was so popular, it actually started to overheat the economy, and the Italian government stopped it. Now, I think we could do with a bit of that, a bit of growth in the economy. So I'm trying to push my MP and through Ed Miliband's department, trying to get them to adopt something similar, perhaps a bit better control. But there we go. But a couple of other things to say. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't have a heat pump. There's a lot of misinformation going about. There's people saying that you've got to have a well-insulated modern house for it to work. No, it's not true. If you've got a gas boiler that currently heats your house successfully, you can have a heat pump that actually does the same thing. It provides the same amount of heat, and it will be cheaper to run if your radiators are big enough to keep the flow temperatures low enough in the heat pump. If they're sort of 40 degrees or below, the heat pump will be sort of 400% efficient. That means it'll be cheaper to run than the gas boiler. And of course, if you add solar panels and a battery to that, then you can bring that down to zero. Now, people also say, well, I've just bought a new gas boiler, so I'm going to have to get my money's worth out of that first for the next 10 years before I consider this. And I say to them, well, that's really a false perspective. You're not getting your money's worth. You're burning money. It's going out through the flue. What you really want to do is get this system in, because that actually saves you money. Burning money is just keeping you in fuel poverty, whereas actually this system can get you out of it. So that's what I want to say. Thanks for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, John. Really appreciate you having you come on and talk us through what you did there. It's great to hear. Next up, we have Matt Fawcett, who is the Energy Systems Lead and co-founder at Carbon Co-op. He's going to be talking to us a little bit more about some of these home renewable solutions, so heat pumps, batteries, solar. Also about something called socializing flexibility, which, as I understand, is how households can engage in the energy market to reduce their energy costs. Matt, great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I think, I mean, I'm in a very similar situation to John. I've got solar panels and I've got a heat pump. Absolutely fantastic. I guess one of our concerns is around how the benefits of the energy transition can be a bit better shared. So I guess one of our, whoops, sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen. And one of the, I think, potentials there is for around heat pumps and other low carbon technology in social housing. So which is what the socializing flexibility project is about, really. So so basically it's participatory research, working with social housing tenants and talking to them about their experience of heat pumps and how they're finding them, essentially. So trying to look at how to improve the performance of the heat pumps, but also at how they can better use tariffs and better use some of the flexibility schemes that are out there, where tenants can get paid for reducing their carbon. I should have checked. Can you see these slides? All right, great. That's fantastic. So this was a survey that we did with social housing tenants. And you'll see, like, it's great. We had over a third saying that their energy usage their energy bills had gone down since having the heat pump installed, but we had around about half saying that their energy usage had increased. So obviously there is some concern there. So it's worth saying, as John has said, that heat pumps are really amazingly efficient. They do a much better job than old gas boilers did. But the problem is at the moment that it costs you about 4 times as much for a kilowatt of electricity as it costs for a kilowatt of gas. So what we're really aiming for is around about 350% efficiency on a standard heat pump, in order for it to be comparable with a gas boiler, and this is within a social housing context. So we should say that lots of the systems we looked at, there were improvements in insulation and things like that done at the same time, covering much of the stuff that Steve talked about earlier. So it's important to look at, I guess, at how we're doing generally at meeting this target. So we know that there are some extremely efficient heat pumps out there, heat pumps that are, live in people's homes, that are 500% efficient, which is incredible. So there's a site called heatpumpmonitor.org, which is a place where people share their the sort of usage graphs, live usage graphs of their heat pumps. It's a resource well worth looking at, and these are sort of enthusiast users, really. So, and there are people with some incredibly low bills or negative bills on there, often through really smart use of time of use tariffs or type of use tariffs. They're normally people who've done lots of research before they make that investment, and they improve the efficiency through trial and error. Now, the sort of national average picture is a little bit less rosy. So the electrification of heat study, which published at the end of last year, was a national study looking at heat pump efficiency. And there were some really high performing heat pumps in there, but there were also some very poorly performing ones. And many of those are systems that were installed under the under eco schemes. So usually those the average of all of those installations was about 280% efficient. So there were quite a few people there who were potentially paying more for their energy than they were doing previously. Now so we're looking at sort of accidental users really versus the enthusiast users at that we mentioned at the beginning there. So they're people who are having heat pumps installed for them, who haven't done all of that research, and there are potentially a number of issues there. So larger rollouts, like estate-wide rollouts, are a bit less bespoke potentially to both the property and how the users like to live in that property. Sometimes tenants don't have the same agency as private householders to change things like weather compensation, because they've got a more sort of limited access to the controls, and often it's an older demographic, or it's people who are less confident with that technology. So we also asked householders how their comfort had changed since having a heat pump, and we found that a lot of people have problems around cold in the winter, and we think essentially this is largely because heat pumps work really well when you run them low and long. So you run them at a low flow temperature, as John alluded to, and you run them pretty much all the time. But I think for people who've experienced fuel poverty, that can be quite challenging. Heat pumps are not as responsive if you use intermittent heating. If you're used to sort of gas where you turn it on and it heats out very quickly. So we found a lot of people were using portable heaters, which are obviously much less efficient than their previous gas boiler. So there is a fear of sort of excessive costs, really. So part of that, I think, is related to when a heat pump is initially installed. There is a period where the heating's been off for a period of time, and the initial cost of getting a house up to temperature might be quite high. So there is a bit of work to do around like supporting people through that period and giving them the confidence that while the initial cost of heating the house up, if you keep the house at that temperature, then those costs will reduce. They also raised a sort of lack of familiarity from support staff and maintenance teams, and a complexity around the user interface and the lack of guidance. So lots of householders were just given the installation manual, which I can't read any of because my eyes are not good enough and the writing is absolutely tiny. So not really the appropriate thing to provide to end users. So most users weren't able to identify what the functions were on the user interface of their heat pump, or know what the impact of that would be. So to look at one of those, there's the little quiet symbol there, and if you put that on, then it will limit your fan speed, which means that your heat pump is limited in the amount of heat it can provide to your house. So there were people who had put this on by accident, and then they were having trouble heating their homes. So I think what I'm keen to say is like what we can do to improve the experience for all. So I mean, a key thing is, to carry on campaigning on the stuff which Fuel Poverty Action is campaigning on already around fuel pricing. There needs to be a a readjustment of the balance between gas and electricity, unpegging electricity costs from gas price. The smart meter rollout needs a shake-up so that smarter tariffs are available to all customers, particularly prepayment customers. That we have a lot of the users that we spoke to have had issues around gas standing charges. So they've had their gas heating removed. Some of them are still using gas cooking, but many of them are just paying gas standing charge with no gas usage because they've been told by their energy company that they can't have their gas meter installed, or they've been quoted several £100s to remove that. So obviously that needs to change to stop people paying these ever-increasing standing charges, particularly for services that they're not using. So for anyone who is living or working in social housing or advising social housing tenants, it's really important to ask the difficult questions. So what will the user guidance be that will be provided to end users? How will end users be supported in the transition to heat pumps? Will there be fabric improvements? Will there be monitoring of the performance of these? And will tenants be able to access that data? Because in most cases, we found that where performance monitoring is happening, the landlord has access, but the tenants don't. So sharing advice and help. So we're making a free user guide for accidental heat pump users. So if you know anyone who might benefit from that, then do let us know, and we'd be really keen to share that. And just peer learning, really. So there are lots of interesting resources out there in terms of the enthusiast groups that there are, and I think we need to do more to try and share that knowledge through peer learning. So schemes like Visit a Heat Pump, where you can go and visit people who've got a heat pump already, could be very useful for social housing tenants, I think. And I think that while these sort of online resources are really great, they don't reach everyone. So it's important that people like myself or like John, who are heat pump enthusiasts and are really comfortable with our systems, that we support our friends and neighbours and those who are vulnerable within our communities to be able to better use those. So I hope that wasn't too negative a view on things, but that's enough from me probably.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate that. It's great to have you here tonight. And this might be a good time for me to just plug an action that Fuel Poverty is currently running. As some of you might know, Ofgem is currently consulting on standing charges, and tonight is the last chance to be part of that consultation. And Fuel Poverty Action has a letter action happening. So I'm going to put that link in the chat. If you haven't sent a letter to Ofgem to calling on abolishing standing charges, you can do it now. Thank you for bringing that up, Matt. And last but not least, we have our very own Jonathan Bean on here tonight, who is Jonathan is Fuel Poverty Action's Policy and Parliament Lead, and he's going to be talking about now how government policy needs to change to help all people benefit from opportunities to enjoy cheaper electricity from renewables. Jonathan, great to see you here this evening.
Hi, everyone. Probably what I'm going to do is actually respond to some of the things people have said as well, because I think it maybe will get us into a bit of a debate. So I think we've heard initially, like, what is possible if you are a little bit geeky, you've got a bit of time, you've got a bit of money, you can achieve amazing results. And I think then we've heard a little bit about, well, actually, what does that mean for the rest of us? And it's actually pretty complicated, as as you heard at the beginning, like even trying to get your ventilation balanced in your home is complicated, and it takes time and it takes knowledge. Running your heat pump, knowing how to run it, is complicated. So I think there are huge barriers for most people to get the benefits we're talking about. And I think the reality is that most government schemes have not delivered the benefits that the geeky people with a bit of time have achieved. Not anything like, the heat pumps, performance problems with mould because of reducing ventilation in homes to improve energy efficiency, then causing condensation issues. People who were given free solar panels often not getting the full benefit from the solar panels because, let's say, their local authority is actually giving all the unused energy away rather than benefiting the resident. So the huge potential that we talk about is not being realized in practice. So it's not just the kind of horror stories we hear about, cowboys completely botching jobs. It's actually a lot of things need to be done right, and it's quite complicated for the residents to benefit from them. So I think one of the questions in my mind is like, actually, it sounds great to have like a better guide that's like understandable to normal people about how to run your heat pump, but there's a lot more to it. As we said, you then got to be on the right tariff. It's pretty complicated. At the moment, we have a bunch of installers that are of variable quality who have no incentive to make sure that the resident, in most cases, the resident's actually benefiting from all the things that they're doing, making sure they're on the right tariff, making sure they understand how to run the heat pump. In most cases, that's not happening. So there's a disconnect between what's happening at the install level and also what's then happening with advice. I also wonder how much more, how we can make it simpler. So could more things be automated? So, as soon as you start talking about, weather compensation, 90% of people are going to be struggling to understand what that even means, let alone how they should then respond. And a lot of people with heat pumps end up online trying to understand, lots of stuff. And unless you're geeky, you get lost pretty quickly. So I think there's a massive problem. So I think one of the challenges is, how do we give people better advice? How do we educate people who are installing? How do we make it simpler for residents to benefit? And how do we make sure we're measuring the results? So a lot of stuff that Matt was kind of touching on, measuring that we are actually making the energy savings we're pretending we're making. In many cases, we're not. In many cases, we're not even checking, which is pretty horrific. So no wonder there are lots of stories out there of, my heat pump is actually costing me more. Because they're not on the right tariff, it's not being fitted properly, it's not being set up correctly. Lots of things have gone wrong, and as a result, they're having higher bills, not lower bills. And people are then scared to get heat pumps. So we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot in many ways, because a lot of these things are kind of obvious that you need to make sure they're on the right tariff, you need to make sure it's set up correctly, that they understand it, etc. These are all very obvious things, but in most cases, they're not happening. So there's a huge issue with both the design and the implementation of government policy to make sure we do things correctly and we deliver the benefits to residents that are possible. And obviously, there's lots of broader policy changes that we're also campaigning for, as Matt was saying. Talking about the lowering the difference between gas and electricity pricing. Obviously, everything has to go perfectly for you to get cheaper pricing, and if you're not on the right tariff and you're not getting the right performance, you're going to be paying more. Now, obviously, if electricity wasn't 4 times more expensive, it would help a lot. But actually, whilst that policy change is still being pushed for, we can immediately make sure people are going on the right tariff. If you're an affluent, geeky person, you're potentially paying 7p, 15p a unit. If you're not, you're probably paying 30p a unit pretty much. So you're paying 2 to 4 times more for the same energy, which is in itself is ridiculous. I mean, we're pushing Ofgem to make sure that actually everyone should be automatically given the right tariff for their usage. That's quite scary to energy firms because they make a lot of money out of basically discriminating pricing between the savvy people and the rest of us. And we want to stop that. We want people to automatically be put on the right tariff to give them the right pricing. And that would solve some of these problems. It would make sure people are not paying 27p a unit for electricity running their heat pump, while someone else is paying 15, someone else is paying 7. It's a crazy situation. So we need to level the playing field between the more affluent and geeky people and everyone else. And if we can do that through all these kind of changes, then we can massively reduce people's bills. But if we don't do this, then I think there's going to be a lot of resistance towards the transition. People will be scared to switch. And we'll also waste a huge amount of money. I mean, we spent billions retrofitting people's homes with some good results, but also some very disappointing results in many cases. So we're going to waste a lot of money and lose public confidence. So we're pushing government on lots of fronts. An initiative we just launched this week is called Retrofit for the Future, where we're working with other organizations to try and improve all elements of retrofitting, which includes also making sure it works for renters, because often they end up missing out on a lot of these benefits as well. So we'll probably during the chat, I'll put a link in the chat about that particular initiative. We're pushing the government to improve retrofitting. They're currently designing the Warm Homes Plan, which is kind of the new branding of a lot of these different schemes that have been knocking around for years. There are improvements already planned, but there's a lot of gaps still in that plan that don't actually deal with all the kind of issues we've talked about today. So it's very important that we push for these changes, because it could go really well or it could go really badly in the next 5 years, and it's very important to get it right. That's probably enough for now. Maybe we'll get a bit of a debate going.
Thanks for that, Jonathan. Appreciate the intervention. Yeah, it's now time to move into the discussion part of the session, where essentially I hand over to everyone else that's here tonight for your comments, questions, and contributions. If you'd like to come in, please raise your virtual hand. You can do that by clicking on the reactions button, either at the 3 dots and then go to reactions at the bottom of your Zoom, or it's React, and raise your hand. You can also type your questions in the chat that I'll be monitoring, and I'm also happy to read those out. Gwen, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'm in a leasehold property, a bungalow, and I'm covered on 2 sides by neighbours. But I've tried to reduce my tariff with my electric. We don't have gas, but in my last house I had solar panels, and I'm missing those dreadfully. As far as the house and its insulation is concerned, I've already done a lot of the things that have been advised, and I certainly have enough insulation in the ceiling, and I don't really have drafts, and I'm not seeing any condensation. I've only been in since May, but I've covered most of the winter. And so it's the southeast, slightly southwest. So I try to get as much sun as I can in the back of the house, but the front gets quite cold. I do have a system that has storage heaters, and what I can do is I've got a program system, so I can program each one of them, and I've got them running, what I think is a quite economical program. So a couple of hours in the morning, then I go out lunchtime so that the house doesn't get too cold. It comes on for an hour, and then likewise it comes on late afternoon. And my hot water, that's the problem, I think, is a basic hot water tank, which I've got on a low tariff overnight, and I've tried. I don't really want it piping hot. because I have facilities for washing my clothes in another area free and drying. So clearly I can be economical, and I don't use a dishwasher. I just need some for sort of hand washing and for washing my pots. There's only me, but still I think it's quite expensive for a solo person. Yeah, so I did wonder about getting someone to come in and just assess as to anything else I could do, but I suspect that will cost me quite a lot of money. So that's my problem, I think. I'm not allowed to have solar panels, obviously.
Thanks for that, Gwen. I see, Jonathan, you want to come in and react to that?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I think it illustrates the challenge for people with only electric heating, with electricity being so much more expensive, and the limitations of what some people can do in terms of not being able to have solar panels, which would obviously help quite a bit with the overall bill for the year. I think some basic thoughts. So one of the challenges which a lot of people have, which you clearly have, is this slight conflict between heating water probably on a cheap rate at night and then using electricity during the day for heating, which probably means your average rate is relatively high. So I guess one of the questions would be whether you can shift using your storage heater heat storage, whether you can actually shift more of your heating to be the same in the same slot, cheap slot as your hot water, and also to make sure your tariff is the best one you can get. Now, it's really unfair, but obviously people with electric vehicles tend to pay 7p a unit roughly for a night rate, whereas a lot of people are actually paying a lot more than that with storage heaters. Now there are a few exceptions to this, which might be worth looking at. So for example, I mean, I also live in a flat. I have the same problem. I use Utility Warehouse just because they have a very cheap night rate, which is massively cheaper than what the big energy firms charge,
right.
Which I was previously with getting ripped off before I realized that some of the smaller players have cheaper deals. So again, it's typical, like if you're able to look across the market, you can actually save a lot of money, which is really not fair because the people probably that need the most help are the people least able to do this kind of shopping around. But there's also a supplier called Tomato, which actually at the moment isn't taking any new customers, but actually also offers very cheap rates. They have a whole series of tariffs. For example, they have a pensioner tariff. They have lots of different tariffs, and you don't have to have an EV in that case. Whereas all the big boys like British Gas, etc., basically really discriminate between people who've got electric vehicles and indeed in some cases heat pumps. So electric vehicle you get like 7p, heat pump you get 15p, but if you've got a storage heater you're paying an average of about 27p. So it's massively unfair. We're pushing Ofgem to get rid of this unfairness.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those standing charges, and they're the culprits. What I do find aggravating is that I bought my house, but because it's leasehold, I can't use solar panels, and that it seems to me that that's a shame, really, for the whole. There's only an estate of 27 of us, mostly.
As you know, the whole leasehold thing is a complete scam and needs getting rid of. But it is a huge issue. Government hasn't really thought very hard about all the people in leasehold and the fact that therefore heat pumps, solar panels, etc., are going to be either very difficult or impossible.
Yeah.
And they've got this model in their mind of this idealized house with a, often even in the government brochure, sometimes it shows like a detached house with a heat pump and a solar panel and an EV being charged at 7p and all this kind of.
I mean, I thought I would be nice and snug with having some people around me, And I mean, also I've found that my water meter is 30 feet away from where I live, and so I can't even get that internally put. Can't get it internal. So
these are the kind of inequalities that government hasn't really spent enough time thinking about.
Yeah.
So some people are going to be in a much easier situation. Some people are really going to struggle. And
anyway, thank you for your advice. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry to dominate the conversation, but it's a bit worrying.
Oh, no problem at all. Thanks, Gwen. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, does anyone else want to come in on some of that before I move on?
Yeah, go on. I'll just very quickly. So I was just going to say, Gwen, you might there's a piece of government research at the moment looking at air-to-air heat pumps, and they're looking for people who are running electric heating who might be up for trying one, and it's and they're basically offering a free heat pump install, and you will get monitoring with it. So I'll put a link. I've put a link in the chat, but just for anyone who is on electric heating, it might be worth having a chat with them. But yeah, and but it is very challenging for those who don't have agency to do things to their own homes. I lived in a similar situation for many years, and I feel your pain.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. And we also had a comment from AK from Leap, sharing a energy comparison website in the chat to help compare the market. Stephen, you wanted to come in?
Hi. Firstly, thank you to all the speakers. It's been very interesting. I think my question is possibly more directed towards Matt, but would be happy to hear from everyone else as well. Based on what we've heard tonight, I feel like this is a problem that is like it's straddling lots of different areas. So there's like a consumer literacy area and getting the right tariff and being able to advocate for yourself with your energy supplier. There's there's a technical element, whereas how you set all this equipment and like a scientific method and how you adjust that to make it work better. And there's also the problem of like upfront capital to be able to get these things to even be a possibility. And how I wanted to direct that at Matt was if he thought there was more of a role that like a social housing provider could possibly take in that regard, in terms of like, I'm thinking something more along the lines of like a district heating network, but with heat pumps, like if they had like central control over the supply in properties that they own anyway. So they own the property, they own the heating system in that property. They could be paying staff to monitor and adjust these things on centrally, but for a group of their stock. And from the housing's perspective, you know, we saw John's graphs there and about how it can actually be an investment which pays for itself and then is over and above better than other ways of saving. Now, I've got a bit of experience working in the housing sector, and that feels quite far off, to be honest. But yeah, I wonder what you would think about something like that, and more of a collective model rather than each individual consumer trying to get the best package.
Yeah, I think there is huge potential in that, and that's one of the things that we're sort of most interested in this sort of pilot project, really. So I think so a major thing is getting heating systems connected to the internet, because that then provides the ability for support and maintenance to take place. So rather than having to send an engineer out, you can often troubleshoot problems or help tenants remotely. But also it means that you then have a level of centralized control. And I think that sort of automation that was mentioned earlier, I think, you know, is probably what we're going to need to widen this out to the sort of mass of people. I also think, I mean, there are some very interesting models in terms of, I'll put a link in the chat, but there's a pilot in Ireland at the moment called Energy Cloud, which is a social enterprise looking at basically using excess generation. So we pay a lot of money. One of the reasons that our charges are going up is because we pay for curtailment. So which is when there's too much wind or there's too much solar. So we pay generators to turn off that power, which seems to me to be like morally unacceptable at a time when there is such widespread fuel poverty. So with the Energy Cloud model, they were putting immersion heaters in social housing and then controlling those to use that excess generation. And social housing, social landlords could do the same thing with that management service that they have. I think it's very important that tenants remain in control. I'm a bit worried about the idea of turning down people's heating. But yeah, if heat could be included in the rent, that would be very useful. And then perhaps optimization could be done from, by the social landlord. But I think hot water is a really major one, because hot water is essentially a cheap battery. It's just a way of storing energy for at times when it's plentiful, so that you don't need it later. So there is very minimal danger of causing anyone difficulties in comfort by just putting their heating on, scheduling their hot water earlier, or running Legionella cycles, which are very expensive to run. Whether you're running electric immersion or whether you're running heat pumps, it's a very costly process.
Thanks for that, Mark. I have a hand from Ruth and Jonathan. Ruth, did you want to come in on this point? Yeah.
Yes, fine. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of this is going towards something a bit more communal, and of course, we now have these massive district heat networks that they can be small. It can be just a block or even a small block, or it can be like a whole estate or even a district. And they've been hugely problematic in this country. Some countries seem to manage them a lot better, but here it's been done in a sort of hodgepodge, all put out to private tender, and then you get perverse incentives to make them run badly, and they do. Surprise. And there's now legislation coming in, but that will regulate them somewhat, but it doesn't solve the basic problems. However, the basic principle of actually sharing things makes a huge amount of sense. And I was in a meeting just this week with somebody from CREW, which is, I don't know what the acronym's for, but they do a lot of work on this kind of thing, including a lot of heat networks and communal heating. And he said, well, just look at it. If you have 30 houses, you don't actually need as much hot water. You need about 70% of the hot water that you would need if everybody had it individually, because not everybody is going to need a shower at the same time. So, it just makes a lot of sense from that point of view. And he also was putting forward some specific things, some of which are quite simple, like foil behind the radiator, which we haven't mentioned, but is very useful. Smart TRVs, thermostatic radiator valves in bedrooms that come on just before bedtime if you are not in your bedroom in the daytime, which some of us are, but a lot of people aren't. Can save a lot of money. And something called hydromix that I don't know if any of you experts know about, but he says it's a very promising way of actually getting more out of radiator systems. But on the sharing issue, be careful about including heat in rent. There's a load of tenants in Lambeth, council tenants, who are facing eviction because of their heat arrears, which the council is calling rent. So if you have a heating system and it doesn't work very well and it's hugely expensive and you can't keep up with it, then you stand to lose your home as well. The big question about waste heat, sorry, not waste heat, but waste energy from like when excess wind or solar. That's something that's so huge that Fuel Poverty Action is actually looking at making that a main part of one of the ways that we can go towards energy for all, because we've been saying for a long time that people should have free heat to cover the basics, and now there's all this free energy to cover the basics, and now there's all this energy that is free because it's just people are being paid to turn it off. So it looks like something that could match up very well. And we'd be really interested in working with any of you who want to develop that thought. I'm done.
Thank you for that, Ruth. Great, loads of stuff to unpack there. I'm really curious about these smart radiator valves. I'm gonna look those up a little bit more. Jonathan, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, Ruth said some of the things I was going to say, but just going back to the specific energy cloud implementation of using the excess energy that we're talking about, which obviously at the moment we're wasting hundreds of millions of pounds on curtailment. We're also building lots of more batteries and grid infrastructure to move it around when we could be using some of that to give people free energy. But one of the shocking things is we've spent the last few decades, and in fact, it's still happening today. We're actually going into homes, ripping out the energy storage from the homes, ripping out clean heating and energy storage, so storage heaters and hot water tanks, and putting gas in. It's still happening. So it's like completely opposite direction for where we're heading, but we still haven't completely realized and stopped the mistakes of the past. We're continuing to make some of those same mistakes. So we could be, obviously, if we had more people with hot water tanks, we could then be doing more of the energy cloud idea to store that energy. If we had more storage heaters, we could be putting more heat into storage heaters. But instead, we've been ripping them out because the energy firms and Ofgem have been charging people such a crazy price for Economy 7, which theoretically speaking should be a super cheap tariff. It's very green because it's off peak. But instead, we're charging people the same average price for Economy 7 as standard. So there's about a 3% reduction for the massive advantage that it's providing to our energy system. Because they increase the day rate by so much, it wipes out the saving from the night rate. So, I mean, it's absolute madness. So a lot of the disconnections between like what the government policy should be, it just is so nonsensical, but we just need to sort all these issues out very, very quickly before we continue to make the same mistake. But yeah, so Energy Cloud, something like that is great for those homes where we haven't already ripped out the storage heaters and the hot water tanks, but we can of course use it still. We can use it for heat pump tanks as well. So this is not the end of the world, but we've ripped out a lot of stuff that we could have used in terms of energy storage, which is very sad.
We can get them put back in. They can find a lot of money for big infrastructure like nuclear power stations. You know, you can get an awful lot of hot water tanks for the cost of a nuclear power station.
Absolutely, yeah, and luckily you get a nice big tank with a heat pump, so we could be sticking some heat into those for a start.
Thanks very much. That was all very interesting. Lots of well, fuel for thought, I guess. Sorry, couldn't help myself.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate that. Zav, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you everyone for sharing your experience with us tonight. I'm an energy advisor. I'm quite green, but I'm quite interested in the air source heat pump. The reason is because my main work is basically talk to the residents and help them to find different schemes all the time, like the eco scheme, the hug scheme, and even some who are not eligible. Sometimes we want to talk about the boiler upgrade scheme as well, if they are interested in the air source heat pump. But one thing I always feel really confused is, especially, from the eco scheme, usually if they do the retrofit and have the funding for residents to install the air source heat pump, of course, they would do the fabric first, to do the insulation first, before the air source heat pump and then the solar panels. But if we are looking at the boiler upgrade scheme for the general public, to apply for this 50%, £7,500, and they need to top up themselves. In the past, they need to have some minimum insulation requirements. However, last year they take it off, no minimum insulation requirement. So my interest is because Matt earlier, and John, they mentioned about the efficiency of the air source heat pump, and it should be more than 300% because the electricity price is 4 times more than the gas. So why would I want to switch to air source heat pump if if it's just a balanced game for that? So my question is, does that mean for the air source heat pump and food aesthetic is the house should be actually really well insulated to make the air source heat pump to be really efficient, so that they can make use of the air source heat pump and they don't need to pay extra bill or to increase their bill even they install the air source heat pump from that.
Could I come in on that?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Let's hear from John. Let's then go to Steve and then Jonathan.
The efficiency doesn't. The level of insulation doesn't really affect the efficiency of the heat pump. It affects the amount of heat it's using or the amount of energy it's using, but not the efficiency. The efficiency is really to do with the low flow temperatures that you can achieve, and that determines the efficiency. But insulation helps with a gas boiler or a heat pump. That's why I said before that if you've got a house that's heated by a gas boiler successfully, you can put a heat pump in, and as long as you've got your radiators large enough to have a low flow temperature, it will be cheaper to run than a gas boiler. It doesn't matter about the level of insulation, although obviously insulation helps in both cases. So that's the situation there.
Sorry to interrupt here. My quick thinking is, when we learn about it, the fabric of the house would have lots of heat loss. The wall would be 35%, the loft is 25%. So I wonder if I didn't do the insulation and with the heat pump, will I actually need to run more and use more electricity because there is some heat loss through the fabric?
Well, yes, you will need to use more electricity than if you had insulation, but your gas boiler, if you had a gas boiler before, would also be using more gas because you didn't have the insulation. But if the heat pump is more efficient to run than the gas boiler, it will be cheaper to run than the gas boiler, and the level of insulation affects both. So in the same way. So if you've got twice the heat loss out of the property with a gas boiler, you'll be spending twice as much on the gas. If you've got twice, with the heat pump, you'll be spending twice as much on the heat pump. The level of insulation doesn't affect the efficiency of the heat pump. Independently of the gas boiler, it would also affect the gas boiler. If you've got your heat pump set up so it's more efficient than the gas boiler, in all situations with all levels of insulation, it doesn't matter. The heat pump will win.
Thanks, John. Steve, Jonathan?
Can I go? Yeah. Yeah, just jumping back to what John was talking about in terms of the peripheral details, that one thing is dealt with. So a plumber or a contractor will walk up, install a boiler, but then they don't look at anything as was mentioned around it, like the tariffs required, or an air source heat pump, the tariffs required, or the control system, if the control system's operating properly. They'll just come in, replace the boiler, walk away. They won't give a resident any advice about all of the other problems that are existing in their property as to why the heating system doesn't really work properly. It comes down to very fundamental things. So the room stat is meant to be in the living area or living kitchen area, living dining area, primary living space. But I go to a lot of flats, even stuff built in the last 5 years, and the stat is in the hallway. So you close all the doors, the stat's in the hallway, it's heated very quickly and satisfied, the stat's satisfied very quickly. But all the peripheral rooms that have got heat loss, walls and windows and so on, they're all cooling right down. So you get a real offset between different spaces within a property. I've even had one where the room stat was in the bedroom. The building regs are very clear about all of this. It has to be in the living space, but nope, doesn't suit some contractors and so on. You get the stat everywhere at random. But it's the terrible tendency for contractors is to turn up, install something, and just walk away. And unless it's legislated for that, you must go back and do a future visit and demonstrate that things actually working efficiently and as it was intended. It's it's problematic, and it's also down to the fact that people replace bits of kit, boilers or whatever. They replace it with the wrong thing. It's because they don't understand how the existing system was set up and how it was supposed to function efficiently in the first place. And what happens is you don't get any details. So the boiler manual or the time controller manual, easy to get them on the web these days if you know where to look, but these things are long gone. An extreme example is I've got these in large buildings and large commercial property where you walk in and the building has changed hands twice in 10 years. There isn't a single drawing for the building, for the systems in the building, not a single piece of information about how to maintain it, not a single bit of record about whether it's been maintained or not. And this is similar to domestic properties, where sometimes that'll be the case if landlords, not so easy to avoid the gas regulations, all these things these days, but it's problematic. So what I suggested about commercial buildings was that actually we should make it a legal requirement that if you want to sell a property, if you want to sell a building, you have to pass it on with all of the manuals, the information and everything to various standards that already exist. All of that information must be there for you to put into the pack you give your purchaser the building. So this forces people, it'll appear in the conveyancing schedules when people buy a property, same as it could for domestic property. You must have all those manuals and bits of information and pass them on. And if it's in the conveyancing schedule, the solicitor just stops the sale, doesn't advise you to do the sale because you haven't got all the information that's mentioned in statute. So, you're covered. So there are, sledgehammer ways of dealing with that. But it's the complexity of all of these things. I mean, I'll be so blunt as to say that the industry that I work in that's supposed to deal with all these things patently doesn't. So you have multiple layers of subcontracting. The people at the bottom have no resources to buy gas. Industry IGN manuals are £200 a throw. The guy working out of his garage, is he going to spend £2,000 on a set of manuals so he does his gas safe stuff correctly? I mean, it's kind of it's just like that. All other aspects are like that. The larger companies don't do the training anymore. They don't train people, and then it's resources and time. So electricians, I had to beat them to tell them almost that work you're doing isn't finished until you've done the testing. But the builder's standing behind them going, sure, you're finished, it's all done, it's all connected, it's all in. You haven't done the testing. But the job isn't finished until you've got a certificate in your hand that you've signed off, you've done all the different tests, and you can pass that across and get people a Part P for their property. But people just make all these figures up. They write them in random figures. And so the heat network, to jump back to that very brief, I'll stop for a second or two. The heat networks regulations that are coming through are not the be all and end all that a lot of people seem to think they are. Gas regulations came in back when the Running Point disaster happened and nearly knocked down an entire block of flats, killing hundreds of people. After that, Corgi, all of these things happened. I still go into plant 50 years of gas regulation. I still go into plant rooms and various areas in commercial buildings and domestic properties and heat networks where things are not gas compliant for combustion air or from the installation of the gas and the sizing even of the pipework. So it doesn't work unless the money is in the system on a week in, week out, day in, day out basis, that the person you send to do something has the time to do that job. And that's all about money and about good management. And it's an impossible hill to climb. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Jonathan?
Yeah, just going back to the basic question about, do you need to insulate before you get a heat pump? Yeah, I totally agree with the general point that obviously insulation helps regardless of what heating system you've got. So it's kind of a separate decision. I guess, just practically speaking, though, if you've got the potential to do relatively cheap insulation like cavity wall insulation before putting the heat pump in, it would definitely make sense. And you can get funding through things like the much hated GBIS, Great British Insulation Scheme, potentially could pay for that. Because also, I think you would want to do that insulation first, because the upsizing of your radiators, for example, would be dependent on the heat loss of the property, and also obviously you would logically do that first, so you get the right heat loss before you then make the adjustments to your radiators. But yeah, I think, why is there such a big rumor that, oh yeah, you've got to do fabric first? I think one of the things is, obviously, if you do fabric first and you do both, then obviously you deliver much bigger benefit for obvious reasons. I think also it potentially helps cover up some suboptimal heat pump installs. So for a contractor, if all they're doing is putting in a heat pump, it puts the pressure on getting that heat pump set up correctly to be really efficient. Whereas obviously if you've got other stuff going in like insulation and solar panels, that kind of covers your tracks quite a lot, because those other things will be bringing the bill down. So maybe there's less focus on the heat pump actually being set up correctly. So there's probably some bad reasons why people, also, as well as good reasons why people say do it all. And obviously, the other point is you want to be getting a tariff that's a lot cheaper than 4 times more expensive than gas. So a lot of heat pump tariffs are about 15p, which is, only like 2.5 times what gas costs, rather than the 27p standard off-gem rate. And you can get obviously cheaper using various agile tariffs and stuff. But basically, if they're getting a better tariff, that will obviously help as well to make sure the bills are affordable.
Thank you, Jonathan. Matt, I'm aware you probably have something to like a direct point to this, but I'm aware we're running out of time, and I want to give Jilly, who hasn't spoken yet, time to speak. Hi, Jilly. Welcome.
Hi, it's more about the fact I'm a home energy advisor, so I'm going into people's homes and I am giving advice. And the thing about the air source heat pump is that I have not very much info and about whether it's suitable for a house, and I wouldn't give them that information without being secure in that. But in general, I come across comments like, "Oh, don't put it in an old-fashioned house; it's going to be a nightmare." And I just want to know whether that's something that would be sort of like you could say one way or the other, because the general sort of consensus I hear is do not put an air source heat pump in a older type of property that isn't a new build and all the rest of it. And second question would be, when you said about a thermostat being not in the hall as a suitable place, I've always said, oh, it's best to be in the hall because it's the colder room, so it will heat the rest of the house more, and rather than switching off too early. So I'm now confused, and I'm meant to be giving out the advice to people. So anybody can help on those 2 points. Thank you.
Matt?
Yeah, so I think, so John is right that installing an air source heat pump is always, in every case, going to massively reduce your energy usage by probably 2/3. It will massively reduce your carbon footprint by 80+%. But electricity is a lot more costly than gas. So there were some really good examples on heatpumpmonitor.org of people running really successful systems in old Welsh cottages with not very much insulation, but that's because they've been well installed, well specified, well designed and well commissioned, and the person knows how to use them. So I would be, I would be nervous about recommending air source heat pumps in all cases. And I think there is a good basis, as Jonathan has raised, in terms of doing at least all of your basic fabric measures before you install, just because then you get an appropriately sized heat pump for the heat loss that you have, rather than something oversized.
Can I do the question about room stats? So the room stat, it is in building regulations, but it may not be in the next round. I'm not sure. In building regulations, that central room stat should be in the living area. The reason for that is that that's the area that people primarily use. So if you set that to 20 degrees and it's satisfied, it's interlocked with the boiler, so it turns the whole heating system off. The problem with the hallway might be if it is, it's going to take a long time to warm up. It's the converse of what you just said, Jilly, really, in that it therefore means that the heating system is running potentially unnecessarily to heat lots of areas of the rest of the house that have already reached 20 degrees and are heading towards 24 degrees. So that's the logic of that. But it doesn't work if you get something that's a stupid anecdote, but we had like kind of medicine, oh dear, I forgot the name of the thing, like a masonette type arrangement with the thing inverted. So the living space wasn't on the ground floor, it was on the top floor.
Well,
So whenever the stat was, up on the landing on the top floor, of course, all the heat went up there and it was satisfied very quickly, but the bedrooms down below were freezing cold,
well, I usually say that the thermostat should be set 2 degrees lower in the hall, so that the other rooms, which are warmer because people are sitting in them or whatever, that they will be naturally 2 degrees higher, so you don't overheat them. So I don't know what you think of that.
That's right. Yeah, that's if people have got the stat there and they can't move it,
They're
then
stuck, rather than movable around the house.
Offset, yeah. Yeah, that's an kind of offset temperature. So yeah, that works perfectly well.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that, everyone. Before we close, I do just want to maybe bring in a question from Meg, who posted in the chat. I wonder if Meg, you wanna raise your question to the room, if you can hear me. Yes.
Yes, well, I'm in a very, very old property, and there's many tenants like me living in these very old properties with landlords that won't do anything. Basically, I don't have any radiators, I don't have any central heating. I've got gas fires, which are 20, 30 years old. I can't, if they're very, very old. I mean, my present landlord actually does make sure that he does that they do a regular annual check. So my heating is based on gas. I've got no insulation. I've said this before. I have to put cling film at the windows. I don't have thermostats. I've got nothing. I've got an old 1967 electrically heated boiler to heat the bathroom water, and then a small electric heater in the kitchen for heating the water there. My bills are huge. I'm constant. I've got so much cling film at this type of insulation at the windows. It's very difficult to actually ventilate the property, and humidity does build up, and got condensation and things. So I'm not the only one. So how are we going to deal with this? I mean, the private renters bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment, is talking about having an energy performance certificate of minimum of C, and that's every property has to achieve this by 2030. Well, if I'm still alive, I don't know what my landlord's going to do about that, because my landlords won't do anything. If I have any improved heating system, then my rent goes up, it doubles. This is what happens. So I don't know how this is going to pan out for all of us private renters, particularly for older private renters and particularly for older women private renters, because, we are, women pensioners are the poorest and we have the lowest pensions. And so we're going to be in a pretty terrible pickle. And I've actually had terrible winter, and I'm walking around in heaps of clothing, walking from a heated room to a freezing cold room, which is really bad for health. I've said all this before, so how on earth are we going to get landlords in private rented properties to actually retrofit, because I've got no insulation, actually to put in heat pumps and so on, without all these tenants being asked to pay twice as much in rent and so on. And it's really is a huge, huge problem. And in fact, I can't heat my bathroom. I have a shower twice a week, and then, because it's so cold, and also I have to sort of do a wash, right, basically the rest of the time because it's so freezing cold. I'm not the only one. There's thousands of us in these old properties, thousands and thousands. I mean, I'm in a rent control property, and there's still 73,000 of us in these old Victorian buildings, which don't come under any legislation really. So I just wanted to know any ideas about what can be done there. I mean, I'm doing my best and putting as much pressure on through various organisations to actually achieve something. But what can we do?
Yeah.
And we'll die, you see, because cold homes kill, as FPA have been saying for years.
Thank you for coming in, Meg. Jonathan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, it's an absolutely terrible situation that a lot of people are actually in. I suppose just on the positive side, the government has already announced a chunk of money under the Warm Homes Plan going to landlords. So it's not just this 2030 deadline that's being discussed, but also there is a lot of the carrot as well as the stick. So they can get given £15,000 per property for insulation, £15,000 for heating systems. So in theory, there's £30,000 available to landlords as of 1st of April to spend on these kind of upgrades. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, but there is potentially money there. So obviously putting pressure on them and making them aware. I'm not even sure if all landlords have actually realised this yet, because it's actually a lot more generous than it has been in the past. And also the thing, if you look at our retrofit for the future link that I put earlier in the chat, one of the demands in the campaign is to make sure that people's rent is not put up as a result of this kind of retrofit. There is definitely a massive risk. At the moment, there's no protection. So a landlord could get 30 grand and put the rent up or sell the property, which is obviously, ridiculous. So one of the demands in the campaign we're part of is to make sure that there is a rent control to stop any rent increases or any retro-evictions going on. So it's very important that those protections are put in place, because now the money is available, there is obviously a danger that some landlords will be unscrupulous, take the money and profit from it rather than have the benefit going to the residents. So, yeah, part of the solution is already in place, and part of it's still missing.
Thank you for that, Jonathan.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna gently close the session just by sharing a few links in the chat. Again, this one about the final consultation, the final opportunity to answer off-chapter consultation on getting rid of standing charges, and invite everyone to sign the Energy for All petition if you haven't done already. Which is Fuel Poverty Action's campaign for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to cover essential needs like adequate heating, lighting, cooking, and access to medical or mobility aids. I'm also going to invite everyone who's here tonight and who's, you will have amazing things to contribute, to consider becoming a member of Fuel Poverty Action if you want to take part in more of our discussions and decision making. Identify yourself as a member and represent Fuel Poverty Action. You're very welcome. And please also let us know how you found this session. thank you so much for being here tonight, for listening in, participating, and a big thank you again to our speakers. Thank you also for everyone who shared some links in the chat. I'll be collecting them and sending those around to everyone in the next email. And yeah, thank you to Leap for being here tonight as well. Please switch your cameras on, switch your sound on, give us a wave goodbye, and say good evening, enjoy your dinner, and see you next time on
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thursday of the month.
Cheers very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Good night.